Hey everybody, Eric Grenier here, and welcome to the 142nd episode of the Writ Podcast. We're in week 3 of this election campaign, and a lot of the focus has been on candidates, and usually for the wrong reasons. So what do the parties do to vet their candidates and dig up the dirt on their opponents? I'm joined today by 3 veteran campaigners. Laura D'Angelo has worked tour central in federal and provincial elections for the Liberals and was Director of Campaign Operations for the Liberals in 2019. She's VP National Strategy and Public Affairs at Enterprise Canada. Melanie Paradis was Director of Communications for past Conservative Party leader Erin O'Toole and is President of Texture Communications. And Cheryl Oates was the Executive Director of Communications and Planning for former Alberta Premier Rachel Notley. She's principal at GT Executive Advisors and is the co-host of the Discourse podcast. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Unfortunately, we lost Vandana. She felt the lure of the campaign. She probably got too excited talking about it last week. She felt that she needed to get back into it. So we're recording this on Tuesday morning, and the deadline for candidate nominations passed on Monday. And I think we're going to get the full slates from Elections Canada tomorrow. But we've already seen ahead of this deadline that there was a few Conservative candidates that were dropped. There are a few Liberal candidates who were dropped, and they had to replace them at the last minute. So I'd like to talk a little bit first how parties go about vetting their candidates and then also, I guess, unvetting their candidates. Melanie, why don't you start? What is that process like?
Well, it always starts, I guess it starts with Google, but there's also something called the Wayback Machine. And maybe I'm dating myself here, but there's a website on the internet called the Wayback Machine. And it's a way, it archives, like every website in existence, it archives all of your tweets. Like there's a way to pull old Facebook posts, things that you've deleted from the internet or that you thought you deleted. There's actually screenshots of it everywhere. And so whether you're pulling it from the Wayback Machine or if you've had someone who's been following a high-profile individual who you thought might be a candidate in the past and screenshotting things for this reason, you're looking through dumb things they've tweeted, dumb things they've posted on Facebook, offensive things that they've written. But this can get really difficult the higher profile the person is. Like we've had, I'm sure we'll get into this, candidates across parties who have been journalists or who have had podcasts or radio shows where there's just so much content to go through and you never know, like, what did they say that one time? They made kind of a blue joke. And now it comes back 10 years, 15 years later to bite them. So the process is you've got a couple of nerds in a room whose job it is for several days to like dig through everything they possibly can to find some dirt on your own people so that you can anticipate how are we going to respond to this stuff. Or if they find something that is egregious that you don't want to have to respond to, you dump them.
Laura, what's that process been like for the Liberals?
So, it's largely the same as what Mel describes, but if you lay out the whole sort of start to finish, the way this generally happens is you decide you want to run, you submit your paperwork, and the party, and this is true for all the parties, do background checks on a variety of things from, your credit score, can you legally run, making sure you have those boxes checked. And then assuming those are all valid, they then move to what Mel's talking about, which is a few nerds in a room, deep diving the internet. And you also might make it to an interview. Often there are interviews, at least in Liberal land, and they might ask you questions about some of the things they've found. It might be, would you say that today? How would you defend that today? Why did you say that? Can you explain this, right? They do generally, I would say most parties give their candidates a chance to talk about it, defend it. And that is why you then see those candidates make it through the green light process, right? If the party or the people doing the vetting and the interviewing feel that they have enough or that you have a good enough answer and explanation, they will let you get all the way through. And then you get to green light and then you have to, win your nomination, or if you're acclaimed, you get acclaimed. But the process can be really sticky, right? Like I feel really bad, especially for people, younger than most of us on this call who have had social media since they were 16 years old or 20 years old. I don't know about all of you, but if I was held to everything I said and believed back then, like that's pretty tough, right? And so to Mel's point, there's screenshots and records of all of this, no matter whether you're wiping your account or not. And the question is, how motivated is your team, but also your opposition to find that?
Cheryl, when this process, I imagine that for a last minute person, the vetting has got to be accelerated versus when someone puts their papers in months before. Are there different levels of vetting based on like how much time you have?
For sure. And I think those star candidates or the higher profile candidates or the people who have like had a podcast for a really long time or have had a lot of stuff out in the public record, it's really hard to drop those people in last minute because there's just so much content to go through, and with every piece of content comes a little bit more risk. So I do think, depending on the competitiveness of the riding that they're running in, depending on how high profile they are, depending on how much you think your opposition will be putting into researching them, that's sort of what you have to weigh if you're willing to take them on as a candidate last minute, because as both Mel and Laura have said, like, of course your team takes on this big load, and God bless the nerds, as you both have called them, who are willing to go through this stuff, because honestly, at least I can say on the teams that I've worked on, these teams have found stuff that like our opposition parties have never found. They have been able to dig so deep. They have been able to come up with stuff where I can say, when I was campaign director, I believe we have found everything. And those people, those are suckers for punishment. They're willing to sit in a room and comb through like people's decades of social media posts and listen to hours and hours and hours of podcasts or rap music or whatever, background candidates have. And then as an organization, you can say, usually it's a small group because you like to keep your secrets close, to say, can we bear this risk? Can we take it on? Is the candidate and is the organization comfortable with the path forward? Should this get out in the open? So it's a very delicate process, but man, I've been very lucky to work with some really incredible vetting teams.
Yeah. And I would say, Cheryl, it's interesting when you talk about high profile candidates too, because on the one hand, there's so much to comb through there, right? There's just so much content. There's books and articles and hours of listening. On the other hand, sometimes the high profile candidates are easier because you know what you're getting, right? Mm-hmm. You know what they've said, or you at least have an idea of who they are, their beliefs, their values. So you can probably take a guess about the things they've said, and you're taking that risk on without necessarily having to listen to every single part of it. Sometimes the hardest ones are either the complete unknowns or those middle ones, right? People who have been really online, but they don't necessarily have enough of a profile that people know exactly what they've said. Those can be really hard because you have to listen to, watch, and read so much because you have no sense of who they are yet.
Yeah, and there are some candidates, so I'll use Evan Solomon as an example, where the threshold of what he would have to have said to get it so high.
It's a great example.
Yeah.
Because his name recognition, his value, like there's a cost-benefit analysis that you do in this, right? And so what he would have to have said or offended, to be offensive, would be incredibly high in order for him to be ousted, whereas a complete unknown who had one stupid Facebook post, that could be all it takes for them.
I'll add one more example because Danielle Smith was a really good example of this in the last election in Alberta. She had like decades and decades of like radio shows and podcasts and being out in the open, being the Wild Rose leader. And she had said some really, to many people, offensive things, but that was sort of baked into what the electorate already thought about her. So for the NDP to find something that was like, this is vote moving for people, or this is sentiment changing for people, the bar for that was like so high because they had already said like, yeah, we know she said some wild things.
Yeah.
How do you set that bar though? Mel, how would you set the bar for a candidate? And like, are there things that come up in the vetting process and you're like, 50-50, let's keep this person versus let's dump this person? Like, how is that bar set?
I think it changes over time. I don't think there's a fixed bar. I think it fluctuates. It fluctuates based on the person as well, but in each campaign. So in 2019, I was in Andrew Scheer's war room, and the first half of the campaign, we were getting hit every day at 8:30 in the morning with the new oppo drop from the Liberals on the candidate that we were touring, that we were visiting that day. Yeah. It was really well laid out by them. They did a great job. And my job was to write the apologies for each of the candidates. So the first half of the campaign, I was quite busy. And some of them were genuinely like dumb, small things that were not a big deal. And they got to stay the candidate as long as they agreed, like, okay, we're going to write an apology. This is what you're going to do. And then it'll be done in 24 hours. And if you're okay with it, you can survive the 24 hours, you'll be fine. And they would. But I think everything changed in that election and since after blackface, because that was, to me, the biggest biggest piece of oppo that like nobody actually had. No one had thought. Everybody thinks like, okay, for high profile candidates, let's go look at what their yearbooks say. But no one had thought, let's look at the yearbooks where he was a teacher, where he worked. And so it was a surprise to everyone, I think, that those photos existed. And it also completely changed what our threshold is, what the Overton window of what is acceptable and isn't. It completely changed that. And so now I think there are evolving considerations. Like, let's take a candidate like Andrew Lawton, who's running for the Conservatives. He was not allowed to run provincially a few years ago. Same set of data, same record, right? But things have changed. And he has a better story to tell about why he said some of the things he said at the time, and he was battling depression. Like things have evolved, and so for that reason, I think the bar that we set changes as well.
Okay, I want to talk about the oppo research in a second, but first, before we get to there, the fact that we did have, for the most part, the candidates who had to be booted, they didn't come out. I'm not sure if there was news first. A lot of it was things that came out, and the person was then rejected as a candidate, but not with the sole exception maybe of Paul Chang in Markham Unionville. It didn't seem like there was a big news story. It was more that the parties were proactively booting these people as soon as anything came up. Cheryl, what do you think about how the parties actually handled those cases in the run-up to this nomination deadline?
I think the parties very smartly piled on. So Paul Chang got all the headlines. It was a real debate, especially because Mark Carney initially said, he's going to stay on, and then the candidate made the decision to leave. But there was already this sort of news story about candidates. Should they be in the race? Should they be out of the race? Should parties be dropping them? And then it was sort of like you could just merge into the news cycle by saying, we dropped a candidate, another candidate today, instead of it being a whole story about that candidate and the party and the bar they had said it was like, instead of 4, now it's 5. I think if you're going to do it, like do it all, do it fast. And then you, rather than having a day of news for each candidate that's going to exit the race, you have them all grouped together to say, 5 candidates have now been dropped. It's boring for a news outlet to list every single grievance that every single candidate had. So get it all over with and rip the Band-Aid off.
Laura, is there a bit of like a phony war at that case, with the exception again with Chang, who did became an issue that the leader had to talk about, but it was almost seemed like each party decided, okay, we will do like Cheryl said, you drop one, we drop one, we won't make too much of a fuss about it, because I didn't hear much about those other candidates and the other parties criticizing those candidates for having been on the ballot in the first place.
Yeah, so, not being in a war room this time around, it does seem like there's an evolution in how this is happening, right? Previously, it was the way Mel described. You would have a war room, you do your green light, and once green light's done, then it's kind of up to oppo at that point, right? It's each opposition party's job to then find the candidates from their competitors and try and get them taken out via a news cycle or something else. Whereas this time it almost feels like these war rooms divided in half, and they spent half their time doing research on their own candidates after the green light process and half their time doing research on the opposition candidates to try and get them to drop. And so those were all proactive drops, again, with the exception of Paul Chang. And that's really interesting, right? Because they dropped them all before the deadline. They had time to pop people into those slots so they have names on the ballot. In really competitive ridings, they were able to be careful in that way. And so we aren't seeing, normally we would be seeing yesterday and today a ton of oppo dropping so that we can see these candidates drop after the deadline and parties can't get new candidates in. And to me, this is a really interesting evolution in how parties are choosing to use their opposition teams and how they're choosing to try and get candidates dropped. And it's interesting that we don't necessarily see as much coverage. I think there is Andrew Lawton, to Mel's point, but the bar for what counts as acceptable, unacceptable, the stories we're willing to accept for why someone may have said something changes, but also what what leaders are willing to defend have changed, right? So we do see there's a candidate out in BC, and I think it's Aaron Gunn, who, the party is defending pretty vocally, and he's probably going to be allowed to run despite some pretty problematic statements. And that bar is changing as well versus, the Conservative candidate in Kingston, Patterson, who had, was apparently pro or had made some comments that were pro conversion therapy before. And that one took a little bit more time, but was in the shadow of Paul Chang.
Mel, what was your reflection of what you've seen from on this file over the last few days?
So I actually think that one of the biggest challenges with opposition research, including when it's on our own team and vetting, is ethnic media and in different languages. So most parties don't have the capacity to do a ton of opposition research in languages that aren't English or French. So finding a team of people who can help you do research in Punjabi or in Mandarin, that's a unique skill set. And I think some of what you're seeing where you have this last minute push, it's because someone has found something or we just learned about something that we had not seen before because we didn't have the language capabilities to be able to go and find that. And that's one of I think that's where things are going as our candidates across parties get more diverse, as ethnic media gets more diverse in Canada. There are way more opportunities for people to say dumb things in different languages, like equal opportunity offenders in all languages. And the biggest challenge is being able to find that.
Well, yeah, the statements that Chang made were back in January. It wasn't something that he had said a week before before he was dropped out, right?
And Eric, it also brings up sitting MPs, right? A lot of what we've talked about so far are new candidates. And there's a totally different bar, totally different process for incumbents. And often incumbents aren't vetted again, right? It's just out there, and it depends on what your opposition parties find. And so someone like a Paul Chang, that may never have been found, or it could have been found after the election, right? Given he's an incumbent, it's in a different language. There's a whole pile of factors there that change the game.
Okay. Oppo research. Now, I'm assuming that it's largely the same as when you vet your own candidates, that the process is the same. Cheryl, is the same effort put into vetting, looking inside rather than looking outside at the other party's candidates?
I hope so. I think it's more fun. The teams that are typically working on vetting your candidates are the same teams that are working on opposition research. At least in Saskatchewan, we didn't move on to vetting our opponents until we had finished our own team, just to make sure, everything was done before the writ dropped. But I think there's more joy that comes from digging up dirt on your opponents than there is from making sure your own people are clean. So it is a little bit different, but the process is largely the same, other than that you're kind of storing it up and thinking about hits and thinking about rollout and thinking about opportune timing. There's a whole different strategy piece that comes with finding dirt on your opponents, whereas the previous process is basically can we green light these people? Great. Now we can move on and hopefully never talk about it again unless one of our opponents do. But the vetting your opponents and digging up dirt is where the joy for these teams really comes from. And I think why they do the jobs, because when you find something really great, the campaign rejoices around you.
Melanie, is how does that is there a big binder that's put together? Is it all presented piecemeal? Is it, the big report after a month's work? How does that actually come to the attention of the people who are running the campaign?
So it's usually kept pretty tight, actually, because you don't want this to leak out at the wrong moment. And so the first rule of comms is don't tell the comms team anything that you don't want to leak, because they can't shut up. As a comms person, I would often tell people don't tell me things that you don't want me to talk about yet. Wait until I'm okay to talk about it, and then I'll go do it. So basically, the oppo team and the senior team would say, okay, here's what we've got on this candidate. How should we roll this out? And then the communications team will come up with a plan. We're going to give it to this journalist because this journalist is going to be personally offended by this thing that they have said. You get really tactical about it. This particular outlet, this audience, we're going to let this ethnic group, minority group, religious group, whatever it is, let them know that this person said this thing as well, so that they're teed up to give their reaction to that journalist right away as well. It's a whole mini campaign within the campaign to figure out how you're going to roll out this piece of opposition research. It's like, if you take a step back from it, as joyful as it is in the moment, it's a horrible exercise. Like, you're planning how to destroy someone's career and sometimes, their life as well. And their dream of becoming an elected official, so that we can score some points and like take one off of the board for our team. It sucks, but it does feel great in the moment.
Yeah, well, it's like in it's, if you're on a sports team and you have the goon on your side, you're happy to have him on your side, but you don't want to have him on the other side. Laura, how much is left on the cutting room floor when it comes to this oppo research at the end of a campaign?
Tons is left on the cutting room floor. I think that's probably one of the big misconceptions, is that political campaigns are just flooding the media with all these terrible stories and, to Mel's point, ruining people's lives and careers. And there's actually a lot left on the floor, right? Parties don't want to. This is what we talk about when we talk about a dirty campaign or a mean campaign. Parties actually don't want that. Most voters don't like those campaigns. And so what you're trying to do is strategically place all of this information, but without overwhelming voters, right? Without making it such a dirty campaign that voters check out, right? Campaigns are normally about hope. They're normally about change. That's something that you want as a party. Even if you're an incumbent, you want some hope there, you want optimism. And so it's a really delicate balance between what you keep and what you leave. And I think the other thing is, a lot of what you're leaving are tips. I think there can be a common misconception about oppo that it is just, as we're all discussing, these oppo teams in a boardroom on their laptops and on the phones trying to find all kinds of dirt. But a lot of it is brought to these teams. There's the infamous candidate from 2015 who peed in a cup while he was doing work at someone's house. And that story was actually one that wasn't found by someone Googling around. It was a story that had been floating around a particular community. Someone knew this story because they knew the person who owned the house, and they were friends with a Liberal staffer, and they gave that story in the video to the Liberal staffer, who thus brought it into the central campaign. And so that is really, really common, and as a result, it's a certain amount of, just like a journalist, these oppo teams sifting through things that are being brought to them that may or may not be worthwhile.
I think too that there's a difference in strategy. Like, obviously there's some gotchas where like someone said something so egregious that no one had seen that now there's no way they could possibly continue as a candidate. But in my experience, what makes opposition research really impactful is when it's not a gotcha, but you can string your oppo together to create a story or a pattern. And you can say, look at all these examples of the story that we're trying to tell. And that means, just like Laura said, that some of those pieces just aren't going to fit into that narrative. Like if you're trying to say, for example, 23 in Alberta, if you're trying to say, Danielle Smith changes her mind every day, our opposition was a string of instances where she has clearly moved back and forth on an issue in a really small period of time. And stringing that together, you want the public to believe that she's not fit for office because of that reason. But that means anything that doesn't fit into that is a waste of a day or a waste of time. So that's why so much of it gets cut out.
It's a great point.
Yeah, Cheryl, does the oppo research have to make a point? Like, is it, obviously if you pee in a cup, you probably should not be a candidate. But like, if it's something that is kind of off-brand for the party or doesn't really fit into the larger narrative, I think of back in the 2012 Alberta election with the Lake of Fire comments. That fed into what was already a pre-existing concern with the Wildrose Party at the time. But if it had been someone talking about, I don't know, something completely, that they actually were a secret communist or something like that, it wouldn't really fit in with the attacks against Wildrose. So does the oppo research have to fit into that narrative to be worth it?
It doesn't have to. Like, you can always just like throw the spaghetti and see what sticks. But I think when you get something that you like, usually a team will know, like, this fits into a sentiment that already exists or reinforces a worry that the public already has. And you know that from being on the ground, or you know that from your research, that is when you know you have something that's worth pushing out. And that's not to say you can't push the other stuff out. It's just like, if you push it out, you won't be surprised that it doesn't end up in the news, or that people aren't talking about it online, or that it's not shifting vote in that specific riding. It's when it aligns with the story that you're trying to tell, or when it aligns with the worries that the public already has, that this stuff is really sticky. And like, pee in a cup, not necessarily like values driven, but that's something that people remember. And especially if you have audio or visuals, like this is the kind of stuff that's easy for people to remember and easy for them to talk about over coffee or at the water cooler or whatever, because it's shocking.
Mel, what is the decision process and how to use? Are there different, are there stuff that is part of almost a scheduled rollout? Are there stuff that are, break glass, bring this stuff out? Or like how is the decision process made in terms of when and how to use this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, certainly waiting until a candidate deadline has passed is key, because if you can remove a candidate from being elected, from the potential of them being elected and no one being able to replace them on the ballot in that riding, that's a huge score for your team. But like ultimately, it ideally you would have two tracks. You have multiple tracks in a campaign, but you have the message of the day that your leader is delivering. So what's the announcement today? What's the big policy item? That's what they're out talking about. You might have a secondary tour with some of the other high-profile candidates who are doing some other things, but are still kind of echoing the message of the leader. And then you might have the opposition research rollout. And in general, you don't really want your leader talking about the oppo research that's been rolled out. They shouldn't be engaging in it at all, because Canadians don't like it. It's dirty, it's messy. You don't want the mud to be on them. So you want the conversation to still be taking place. You want the media to still be talking about it. You want people on social media to still be talking about it, but you don't want it to come to your candidate, to the leader, for them to have to deliver that message. So it's all about lining things up and timing in the day. So for example, if the leader's out at 10 a.m. Doing their press conference and you want a clean hit on, okay, this is what the announcement is today. So that's at 10 a.m. Stories get filed, let's say at noon. Let's not push the oppo out until 2 o'clock. So that's a different cycle. And they don't come and ask the leader about it until the next day. And by then we'll have a bit more time.
Laura, so we're now at the point where the deadline's going to pass. Names are going to be stuck on that ballot. How does that thought process go when this oppo research comes out against a candidate and you have to make the decision whether to give up that riding or not?
So there's a couple factors. The first one you would look at is it a riding that we're even competitive in, right? If you're not competitive in the riding, you're not going to win. You might just drop them pretty quickly, because it's not really any skin off your nose at that point, right? Why take the hit in the news cycle or a potential long news cycle on it? You'll probably cut them pretty quickly. If it's a riding where you are competitive, maybe not a guarantee, but you're at least competitive, all of a sudden that decision gets a lot harder, because if you take them off the ballot, you have no chance there. And that could, look at an election like this one right now. That could be really impactful in the long run for your overall prospects, right? And if it's a target riding, one that you're almost guaranteed to win or one that you have a really good shot at, Paul Chang is a great example here, right? That becomes a really difficult decision, especially in a tight election. And so your decision factor becomes a bunch of different things at once. It's what's your overall campaign risk tolerance, and that depends on your leader and that depends on your senior team who make those decisions day to day. What is your media risk tolerance, right? Different parties have a different amount of tolerance when it comes to media scrutiny. Part of that is because it depends on how many questions their leaders are asking, who their spokespeople are, how confident they are defending problematic things. That's a really big factor in what you decide to do. And the last one might be when that oppo drops. If you are putting out a major platform plank, if you are putting out something really big, it's scheduled, you can't change it, and this oppo lands, you might choose to cut the candidate really quickly, even if it's a target riding, because your overall campaign strategy is tied to that news cycle. If you can pivot, you might pivot to try and keep them if that riding is essential to your count at the end. But there is no easy answer here, right? And the decision process is a little bit campaign by campaign in terms of where you're at in the polls, but also who's making those decisions and their level of risk tolerance and the type of campaign they like, right? Some campaigns are really field heavy, some are really comms heavy, some are really oppo heavy. And so it's also all of those things come together. This is a really unsatisfying answer, but all of those things come together and the campaign has to make a really difficult choice that has to be made quickly.
There's one other option. can you put your candidate in a hotel room for the rest of the campaign?
Great option.
You send them to Las Vegas.
Yes,
Yeah.
Correct.
Is this the biggest? Is this the biggest source of stress on a daily basis that one of these things is going to come out?
I mean, I think it depends on what the thing is.
Yeah. And not everyone on the team is going to know about it, right? So, in fact, you've done the vetting for your own candidates, but there's only a small number of people who know what's out there about them and have hopefully developed a plan in order to deal with it. But there were things that, like, I was the person who was dealing with candidates, helping them with their apologies, and I was not privy to what our own vetting was about them until something came out. Again, because you want to limit the chance of your own team leaking stuff on your own people, because that's a thing that happens. And one more thing that I want to note about when you strategically drop some of this stuff, that's debates. So next week is debate week, and there will always be juicy oppo research dropped in like the day before, the day of the English and French debates, because you want to force that person, the leader, to have to respond to it on the debate stage.
And sorry, go ahead.
I was going to
Cheryl.
answer just to Eric's question about like how much stress goes into like when is this stuff going to come out. If you are spending every day worrying about whether something's going to come out, I think that is a sign you should have dropped your candidate. So there's a small group of people, you make a decision. If every single day you're like, this could blow up our campaign, don't take that candidate. They should have never been in the race.
Exactly. And I'll add on to that, Cheryl. I think the other thing that is sometimes not fully understood about campaigns is campaigns at the top are really connected. Everyone works together. Everyone kind of knows everything. But the individual teams on a campaign can be quite siloed because each individual job and stream is so huge and there's so much to do that they actually can't be involved in everything. So your team at the top might be thinking about that oppo and all of the candidates and is this going to come out, is this not going to come out? And Cheryl's point, if you're worried about it, you should be dropping them. But your day-to-day teams, to Mel's point, don't actually know necessarily what's happening in all of the other areas. And so they're not really worried about it. They're very focused on their own very massive, hard job every single day.
Okay. I want to finish just with this topic on the rallies. It's been a big focus of this campaign. And as a numbers guy, I hate the questions I get about the rallies are so big, but what about the polls? It drives me nuts. But anyway, I want to talk about the actual organization of rallies. Have one of you really done this in particular? Put together rallies before?
Yeah.
Laura? Okay. What is that process?
Begrudgingly.
So I am a tour girly at heart. I love tour. Putting together a rally is just a massive amount of work. I cannot underscore how much work it is. So I will try and run through sort of start to finish what you would do if you're putting together a rally. First of all, your senior team, so that's everyone around the table, is deciding on target ridings. And normally, strategically for a rally, you want a riding where you're trying to show momentum, right? So Pierre Poilievre's rally in Edmonton last night is a great example, right? He is trying to show momentum in Edmonton because there are some seats that are very much in play for Liberals and NDP right now. And so he's trying to show momentum in Edmonton in particular. So first you're going to choose your target riding, your target region. Then you're going to be talking to your field team to see how many people they think they can pull. Because common misconception, it's not actually the tour team who fills the room. Tour builds the room, and your field or your ground team fills the room. So you're going to talk to field, you're trying to find out how many people they can fill. Meanwhile, your tour advance team is going to be out on the ground trying to find a great location. And what goes into a great location can vary depending on the type of rally you're trying to choose. But generally what you're doing is you're looking for a big space that can have a lot of people, but not as many people as you think you can pull because you want it to look packed. You want to line out the door. You want it to be really busy. Once you get those pieces in place, you now have to physically build the rally. This comes with lots of risers, so all those fancy stages that can be built. You want layers and depth, so you're also looking at, there's a reason Pierre Poilievre is using a lot of big warehouses that have machinery around. There's different heights, right? You can put people on scaffolding, you can make it look really full, and there's a lot of depth, so he looks really dynamic within the space. You also have to light it. There's a really big technical aspect. You have to understand your own candidate's literal facial composition, body composition, because the way you light them is how they appear on screen. It's also how you light the entire room around them. You also then have to get, once you start talking about lighting, you have to start talking about media. We're talking about satellite trucks because they have to be able to actually stream what they're going to be putting out there. You're talking about podium, security, ground checks, right? You have to be doing bag checks. You don't want protesters. If you have protesters, do you have a plan, right? All of that goes into it. And then you actually have to fill the room. Then you have field filling the room. And there's really two types of rallies. There's organic. That is, I would say Pierre in 2022 was getting a lot of organic rallies. People were just showing up. Justin Trudeau in 2015 were really organic rallies. And then there's engineered. I would say in Canada, as a general rule, if a rally is over 1,000 to 1,500 people, it doesn't matter what party it is, that is generally, there is a certain amount of engineering to that. And that means you are trying to convince people to come. You are helping arrange carpools and buses. You are making sure people can get there. You are making it easy for them so that you can fill the room and show momentum. And that also takes a ton of work. If you think about outside of a political context, anyone who's planned an event before, even just a small one, you plan for months on end. These rallies are done in 3 to 5 days. 5 days is the long end. So it's a long answer, but it's a hugely technical thing to do. And they're doing it with bare bones staff, and they're doing it rapid fire every 3 to 4 days.
And it's super expensive. Like when you listen to what Laura just described, you kind of have to wonder, why would you do this? Why would you do it multiple times a week in different locations? Like it's what Pierre's team is pulling off right now is nothing short of incredible that they're able to do that.
Truly.
I'm sure they're spending a hell of a lot of money on it too, because getting these venues, getting all that stuff on like 36 hours notice is not cheap. But like it's the visuals are incredibly powerful. And Eric, to your point, it has really presented a contrast to the polling that we're seeing. And it is really, I think a lot of Canadians are looking at the visual of these rallies and the stories of like ambulances having to be used in Oshawa and there being no bathrooms and no one had coat check because they were hot. And some of the fails, I guess, of the rallies too, because there were so many people. And they're contrasting that against the polling they're seeing, and they're thinking like, well, what's true here? What's really happening? And I think that's a powerful message track for the Conservatives.
You mentioned how it's a lot of work, and you, Melanie, you also mentioned how, it is giving this perception. Cheryl, is it worth it?
Like, I think it depends. Like, obviously the Conservatives right now feel like it's worth it. And I think the point that Mel just made in terms of it being a contrast to the polls probably makes it most worth it. Of course, there's huge benefits if you can pull off massive rallies all the time, if you can withstand the pressure, if you can withstand the burnout, if people can handle, filling thousands of people in a room every couple of days. Not only does that create like a ground buzz that you cannot create in really any other way, but also it's kind of like the best form of content creation there is on a campaign trail. Like when you have adoring people surrounding your leader, chanting for your leader, holding up signs for your leader, and your leader, in most cases, the most energized they will ever be on the campaign trail, and your campaign in the Conservatives' case is largely digital driven, like that is the best content creation you will ever get on a campaign. But most campaigns are not rally first, like rally forward. Rally is a piece of it that you use very strategically because it's a pull on your other resources. And I don't know if the Conservatives have a special rally team that they don't have to pull off of other pieces, but in most campaigns, when the central brains of the campaign say we're going to do a rally, the org department like sighs because now they're going to have to stop doing all the work that they had planned to do. They're going to pull people off doors. They're going to stop the door knocking. They're going to get less marks because the air game feels like showing a rally and showing strength is really worth it at this moment in time. But in almost every case, you are giving something up. So the Conservatives have made a really strategic decision that that's worth giving up in this campaign, or that they've built a separate team to do it. But in most cases, it really is a very careful balance to say, is this one day of great pictures really worth it for everything that we'd have to give up to pull it off?
Melanie, since you know that organization so well, what do you think? Is it worth the cost?
This stage in the campaign, I think that it is, if they're also doing data gathering at those rallies. If you're requiring every person who walks in to tell you their postal code and ideally their address and their phone number, if you're getting that information so that you can call them on election day, knock on their door and say, get out and vote now. You came to the rally. We need you to go vote. Then that's also a worthwhile exercise. But if you're just pulling all of our volunteers, candidates, etc., off the doors for hours, probably the whole day, really, to get from like many kilometers away, many ridings away to get to a rally to show support, and you're not like compensating for that somehow, I think it's a bit of a challenge. However, at this moment in the campaign, like where we're what, T-minus like less than 3 weeks now before the debates, we're not trying to get out the vote yet. Really, you can vote in advance polls, but like most people are not going to vote until the final week. And so again, everything is a cost benefit analysis. And so I think it makes sense to keep doing this right now, to keep showing momentum up until the debate. And then you'll probably shift gears and it'll be a lot more about ground game after that.
Laura, do the Liberals have to try to put up, like we saw Carney had a relatively large rally. I can't remember where it was, but he put that together. Do they have to put up some of these to show that they at least are competing in that enthusiasm gap?
I think they have to put up the same size rallies, right? Like, I actually don't think it's a measuring competition, but it is a showing momentum competition. And so he does have to put up some crowds. It's not necessarily size, but enthusiasm matters, right? Are the people there chanting? Are they excited? Are they happy and smiling, right? I think we can all think of visuals from many campaigns where you have a leader standing up talking at a podium with a human backdrop behind them and there's a kid picking their nose or bored, or there's someone who just looks miserable standing there. That is just, for a tour team, it is just the bane of your existence. And so, you know, Carney does have to have those images of excited people around him, but he is getting those in other ways, right? When you look at his announcements lately, they are in major factories. He's got hundreds of people behind him normally, right? Often workers. He is still getting those human visuals, which is what you want, without doing these massive rallies that they also take a lot of energy from your leader, right? You're not putting your leader up for 20 minutes. When you do a rally, your leader's out there for a long time. They have to work the crowd. Your leader has to really enjoy that. That has to really fill their campaigning cup, because it is hard to do, and it's hard to do for a long time. And, you know, credit to Pierre Poilievre for being able to do so many, so sustained, because it's not easy.
I get the impression that, yeah, sure. Go ahead, Cheryl.
I was just going to jump in on do the Liberals have to like compete with Poilievre on the rallies? Because I don't think they do. Partly because Mark Carney's just not this guy. Like he's not a guy that's going to stand up and work a crowd and get people chanting and deliver all the partisan talking points. But also the moment in our politics and in our country right now isn't necessarily looking for someone who can lead a crowd. Like the people who are, you know, leaning to Mark Carney right now are looking for stability, steady hand through economic crisis. That's like a tough rallying cry to stand on stage and like have people like, yeah, stability. So it's just like in terms of the moment in Canada right now, I don't think people are necessarily looking for a political leader with like gravitas and star quality, the kind of qualities that Pierre Poilievre has in spades. Like he's always proven he's an incredible communicator and he can work a crowd, but that's not necessarily a downfall for Mark Carney right now, because it's not really the mood in Canada at the moment.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it seems like Pierre Poilievre and Justin Trudeau before drew energy from those events.
They did.
Carney does not seem like the kind of guy who draws energy from that kind of event. So I wonder how much of it is also, maybe that's just the last question. Melanie, how much of it is like, does the leader have to be like, I want to do this, or is it people pushing it on him?
The leader's family has to want to do it. Like, this is an all hands on deck thing. And in the case of Pierre Poilievre and his wife, they've been, and their children, like they've been on the road this whole time together. They're really making this like a family exercise. It is exhausting. I'm thinking back to the 2021 campaign with Erin O'Toole and Rebecca O'Toole. Now, that was COVID, so we had slightly different capabilities in terms of tour, but having the family together was incredibly motivating for Erin O'Toole. Like being able to be out with his wife and children was a wonderful experience for him. It was also challenging and hard work, because sometimes you've got protesters and you got to get the kids past protesters, and that's a big risk, and it can be, you know, you got to talk to the kids about it afterwards. Depends on how old they are. Pierre's kids are very young, so that is kind of a blessing and a curse in that way. They may not understand what's happening, but yeah, it takes a lot of energy, and you can tell though, like as everyone has said, that Pierre Poilievre is very much on board with going to these rallies. That he clearly enjoys them.
Well, maybe we'll chat about being on the campaign after 5-6 weeks once we next chat in a little while once we get to the end. So I appreciate all three of you joining me. I know it's all a busy time for everybody, so I appreciate it, and looking forward to the next time we can chat.